Welcome to the deep dive. We take the source material you've shared, the articles, the research, the dense white papers, and deliver the essential distilled insights, giving you the shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Today, we are undertaking an intellectual expedition into human evolution itself. We're tackling one of the most profound questions in anthropology. What singular factor drove the explosive, really unusual enlargement of the human brain compared to every other primate lineage?
And our sources today, they lay out an absolutely compelling argument. It connects our deepest evolutionary past, the diet of our earliest ancestors, with modern neuroscience and even the philosophy of cognitive challenge. It's a work with crystal clear logic that goes so far beyond the simple answers like, we learn to cook.
Right. Our mission here is to really understand an extraordinary link between micronutrient availability and cognitive capacity. Why are we the way we are? And maybe more importantly, what deep lessons does this evolutionary history hold for the intense nutritional and cognitive challenges we are all facing right now in the 21st century?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we're going to talk about the fuel that built this remarkable engine, our brain, we have to start with the absolute fundamentals of nutrition.
To start, we really need to define the components of nutrition as metabolism understands them. And we typically group them into two very, very distinct categories based on what they do in the body.
The famous macros and the micros. But I think the distinction is often really misunderstood, especially when you think about our brain's evolution.
It absolutely is. So think of macronutrients, that's your proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, as the interchangeable fuel. They are the energy providers.
Okay.
If you stop eating carbohydrates, your body can switch to fats for energy. That's ketosis. If you restrict fats, it'll find energy somewhere else. The body is, well, it's incredibly adaptive in how it handles its main energy sources.
But if the macros are the fuel, then where do the micronutrients fit in? What's their role?
They are the indispensable, non-negotiable engine components. Micronutrients are your essential vitamins, minerals, trace elements. They don't provide any energy themselves.
None at all.
None. Instead, they function as these vital cofactors. They're like the tiny wrenches, the catalysts, the spark plugs you need for the efficient transfer and use of the energy you get from the macronutrients. They are absolutely essential for every single biological process: growth, development, reproduction, survival. And crucially, if one is missing, another one can't just step in and do its job.
That distinction, interchangeable fuel versus non-interchangeable parts, that changes everything.
Yeah.
Because it brings us straight to the problem of hidden hunger, which, that sounds almost paradoxical in a world where so many of us have so much food.
It is an insidious, silent problem. To define it, we have to understand the benchmarks of intake. There's the estimated average requirement, or ER.
That's the amount needed for about half the population.
For half the population, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA, which is the amount needed for pretty much everyone. The critical insight from our sources is what happens when your intake drops below that ER.
That's the zone. That's hidden hunger.
That's exactly it. When the intake of an essential micronutrient, let's say iodine or zinc or vitamin D, drops below that estimated average requirement, your body does not signal selective hunger for it. You don't just wake up craving liver because you're low on B12.
So you have no idea.
No idea. This lack of a specific, reliable micronutrient sensor is, from an evolutionary perspective, a profound failure.
So you can feel totally full from the quantity of food you've eaten, the calories, but your underlying metabolic processes are just quietly shutting down because they're missing these specific parts.
That is the very definition of being satiated but starved. The deficiency just sneaks up on you. It often manifests first as these really nonspecific, confusing symptoms like subtle immune system disorders, fatigue, minor metabolic restrictions, long before you see a visible clinical deficiency disease.
Which is why it's hidden.
Precisely. It undermined organ performance, especially cognitive function, without the individual ever knowing what specific quality component is missing from their diet.
Okay, so understanding that the brain needs this constant, non-negotiable quality really sets the stage for the whole evolutionary story. The question then becomes, what on earth forced our ancestors to go out and secure that quality in the first place?
The catalyst was massive environmental change. We have to remember that evolution isn't about organisms actively trying to adapt to their changing environment.
Right, that's a common misconception.
It is. It's the environment itself acting as a rigorous selector. It ensures the selection of those individuals who are already, genetically prepared. It's survival of the fittest in the truest sense of the phrase.
And for millions of years before this big shift, Things were relatively comfortable, weren't they?
They were. I mean, if you look at our early ancestors, like Sahelanthropus tudensis 7 million years ago, they lived in these stable forest and lakeside habitats. They walked upright, sure, but their diet was secure and stable. It was sufficient for their brain size, which was comparable to a modern chimpanzee's.
So in that stability, there was just no strong evolutionary push for something new.
It's exactly. No selection pressure for radical adaptations, and certainly not for brain growth. The brain is just far too expensive metabolically to grow unless there is an absolutely overwhelming benefit. But then, around 2 million years ago, that environmental stability just collapses.
That's the trigger.
That is the trigger. Starting around 2 million years ago, you see these significant climate fluctuations begin repeated cycles of ice ages that alternate with warmer, drier periods. Lake levels shifted violently, vast forests shrank, and they were replaced by these open, volatile savanna grasslands. This instability was the massive wrench thrown into the whole system.
It shattered that comfortable life.
Completely. It forced hominins out of their safe, stable, forest-based food niches. And this volatility created immense selection pressure for traits that favored resilience, flexibility, and above all, the ability to secure nutrient-dense food in these new, unpredictable environments. This pressure for food security and complexity is what ultimately drove the rapid expansion of the human brain.
That necessary shift brings us to this concept of the nutritive niche. Now, we all kind of understand a standard ecological niche, but what makes a nutritive niche unique in an evolutionary sense?
So a standard niche is a habitat where an adapted organism can thrive. A nutritive niche is much more specific than that. These niches pop up when the climate changes and essential foods become scarce, or when a species undergoes a specific mutation that causes a previously non-essential substance to suddenly become essential for that species' survival.
So, like, we lose the ability to make something ourselves.
Exactly.
Right.
The loss of an internal synthesis pathway creates this sudden, total dependence on the external environment. It forces a brand new niche requirement.
So as the external world became unstable, we had to evolve these specialized, almost genetic hacks to exploit these new, limited nutritive niches.
And one of the earliest and most direct links between a genetic adaptation and securing a specific micronutrient is actually the evolution of our color vision.
You're talking about the hypothesis around trichromatic vision, the ability to see the world in red, green, and blue, separating those red and orange hues from the green. Why was that such a profound survival advantage?
It's a direct link to vitamin A and its precursors, carotenoids. Imagine you're an early hominin and you're relying on plant matter. The hypothesis is that developing the ability to distinguish red and orange allowed our ancestors to selectively recognize carotenoid-rich, ripe fruits, a pro-vitamin A source, against that confusing, just overwhelming green backdrop of leaves.
So instead of wasting energy tasting or searching through a bunch of half-ripe, low-nutrient fruits, our vision acted like an immediate, high-resolution nutrient sensor.
Precisely. Vitamin A is crucial for immune function, for growth, for vision itself. So a sensory adaptation that guided hominids directly to high-quality, dense micronutrient sources offered a massive edge in fitness over their dichromatic competitors. It directly maximized the energy returns for every bit of foraging effort.
That's a beautiful example of sensory evolution being driven by nutritional need. But now let's look at a chemical paradox that needs a much more complex explanation. Vitamin C. We lost the ability to synthesize it, which just seems reckless, yet we survived. And the sources argue this loss actually led to an even better metabolic adaptation.
Yeah, the simple theory that we lost synthesis just because vitamin C was abundant in the diet, that doesn't really hold up. Many synthesizing mammals consume huge amounts of it. The real adaptive genius was the evolution of a selective transport mechanism that allowed us to recycle and store this precious molecule.
Okay, walk us through that mechanism, because that sounds like the key safeguard against hidden hunger during those volatile times.
So in humans and other primates who lost the ability to make vitamin C, we developed these specialized glucose transporters on our red blood cells. And these transporters do something remarkable. They actively pull in the oxidized or spent form of vitamin C, which is called dehydroascorbate, or DHAA.
Wait, so we don't just use the good stuff and then throw away the waste product? We actually take the waste back in.
That's it, exactly. It's the body's highly efficient chemical recycling program for a critical molecule. Once that DHAA is pulled inside the red blood cell, it is immediately reduced back to the usable form, ascorbate. This ascorbate is then effectively trapped inside the cell, creating a circulating store in the bloodstream that acts like a reserve tank.
That makes perfect sense. So instead of needing this constant daily replenishment like an animal that makes its own, we develop the ability to hoard vitamin C.
Yes, this circulating store lets us bridge periods of lower vitamin C intake. It provides a critical safeguard against chronic deficiency when, say, fruit sources might be scarce in the winter or due to those climate fluctuations. This adaptation actually proved to be a more valuable trait for survival in unstable environments than the constant energy drain of continuous synthesis.
And speaking of metabolic hacks for scarcity, let's turn to the uric acid alertness mechanism. How did a seemingly negative mutation reducing the enzyme urate oxidase end up giving us a crucial survival advantage?
This mutation allowed uric acid to accumulate at higher but still safe levels in the blood. And this was especially beneficial during periods of extreme food scarcity or involuntary fasting, which was a constant threat to early hominins.
So what does a high uric acid level actually do for a starving ancestor?
It provides two key immediate advantages. First, uric acid is known to increase blood pressure and promote salt retention. On a lean, pre-agricultural diet that was often very low in sodium, this physiological response helped maintain crucial blood volume and stability.
Okay, that's the physiological stabilizer, but what about the cognitive boost?
That's the second, and I think more fascinating aspect. Uric acid shares a molecular structure with caffeine.
Really?
It's very similar. So when hominids faced starvation, their bodies would break down protein stores, causing uric acid levels to rise sharply. This surge acted like a powerful endogenous dose of caffeine, dramatically increasing alertness, focus, and vigilance.
An emergency shot of cognitive clarity right when you need it most, when you are weak and you desperately need to hunt or forage successfully.
Exactly. Our sources describe it as the chemical switch that brings the hibernator out of sleep. An ancestor carrying this mutation would be more alert, more responsive, and better able to find the food necessary to restore their reserves than their counterparts. It was an adaptation that maximized cognitive performance during periods of lean resource availability.
This story of maximizing scarce resources continues with one of the most visible evolutionary adaptations we have, the trade-off between UV protection and vitamin D synthesis as hominins migrated out of Africa into northern latitudes.
It's maybe the clearest example of a genetic calculation where reproductive fitness just completely trumps protection. While dark pigmentation protects against UV damage, the strongest selective pressure for lighter skin was the absolute necessity of ensuring adequate vitamin D synthesis in regions with less sun.
Okay, but if UV protection is so critical for skin health, why did the need for vitamin D win out? Why was vitamin D efficiency so crucial for passing on your genes?
Because a vitamin D deficiency is devastating to the ultimate measure of evolutionary success: reproduction. Vitamin D isn't just for bone health, it's a critical regulatory molecule.
How does that play out in terms of fertility?
Well, in males, low vitamin D status severely impairs testosterone synthesis, it harms spermatogenesis, and it decreases sperm quality and motility. For females, vitamin D acts as a necessary ligand, sort of a key that unlocks the production of critical sex hormones like progesterone and estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And even more critically, it's required for the proper formation and preparation of the endometrium, which is necessary for the successful implantation of a fertilized egg.
So vitamin D status becomes this non-negotiable bottleneck for successful reproduction. If you can't make enough of it because of low UV, your ability to reproduce just falls off a cliff.
Precisely. And that's why traits that promoted more efficient vitamin D synthesis were so profoundly selected for, even if they carried other long-term genetic risks. And that leads us right back to the APOE4 allele.
The gene variant that we now associate with a dramatically increased risk for Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease, I mean, that seems like an enormous cost for a survival trait.
It is the definition of an evolutionary trade-off.
All right.
While APOE4 carries significant risks in our modern context of longevity, historically it was almost certainly positively selected for in sun-poor northern regions. Carriers of this allele show significantly higher vitamin D synthesis in the skin.
Okay.
And they exhibit better intestinal absorption and renal reabsorption of the vitamin.
So the body of an APOE4 carrier is just dramatically better at securing, making, and holding on to vitamin D. In a low sun environment, that advantage completely outweighs the future risk of cognitive decline because without that efficiency, you might not survive long enough to reproduce at all.
Survival in the moment is paramount. Modern longevity is a luxury that our genes, selected under conditions of harsh scarcity, have not yet fully accounted for.
This cost-benefit analysis must have hit our closest relatives, the Neanderthals, especially hard. The sources offer a compelling and really diet-driven hypothesis for their sudden disappearance around 40,000 years ago.
Yeah, traditional explanations often focus on H. sapiens just being smarter or better organized, but let's look at their diet. Isotope analyses confirmed that Neanderthals were pure carnivores. They got sufficient micronutrients, including natural vitamin D from high-quality meat and offal. They thrived this way for millennia, but their niche was highly specialized and very rigid.
And why did that specialization become such a liability when they encountered H. sapiens?
Because of the subtle role of vitamin D in their immune systems. Vitamin D is essential for regulating the expression of a powerful antimicrobial peptide called cathelicidin, specifically the LL37 peptide. This peptide is part of our innate immune system, and it's highly effective at killing pathogens like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the bug that causes TB.
So H. sapiens carried these pathogens, but Neanderthals, as they migrated north or faced resource stress, lacked the necessary immune defense.
That's the hypothesis. As Neanderthals moved further north, or if climate changes forced them to rely more heavily on plant-based foods, diluting their natural vitamin D intake from meat and offal log, their vitamin D status would have decreased, and this drop would have lowered the expression of that crucial LL37 peptide.
Meaning they lost their ability to mount a robust defense against common diseases.
They became acutely vulnerable to infectious diseases transmitted by modern humans, like TB, which H. sapiens had already evolved to tolerate. Their rigid, pure carnivore niche, combined with this precarious vitamin-immune connection, made them the perfect victims in this biological competition. It's a stunning, tragic example of how a deficiency in micronutrient quality can drive an extinction event.
And that Neanderthal fate, it really underscores the critical evolutionary inflection point we faced about 2 million years ago. This shift from survival based on mere caloric quantity to survival based on nutritional quality.
Exactly. Let's look at the baseline. The diet of Australopithecines was heavily plant-based. You're talking fruits, leaves, and these tough underground storage organs, USOs, like roots and tubers. And these are satiating because they are full of carbohydrates.
They kept you full, but they were the definition of hidden hunger.
Absolutely. They critically lacked the micronutrients necessary for robust brain growth. Vitamin A, D, B12, iron, iodine, and zinc. And even worse, micronutrients that were present in plants, like iron and zinc, had notoriously poor bioavailability because of plant compounds like phytates. So you were calorically rich, but micronutrient poor.
Which meant that sustained brain growth was just metabolically impossible. The quality problem was an impenetrable wall.
It was. The evolutionary break came with the emergence of Homo erectus around 1.9 million years ago, and the systematic shift toward regular hunting and meat consumption. And this shift immediately solved the quality problem.
Because animal protein is easily digestible, and more importantly, the offal, the liver, the kidney, the brain, is a super concentrated source of all those essential bioavailable micronutrients.
That's it. This consistent, permanent, bioavailable supply of micronutrients, regardless of seasonal plant variability, provided the food security that was necessary to fuel the rapidly growing energy-demanding brain. It shifted the evolutionary equation from merely surviving scarcity to actually thriving on reliable quality.
And that rapidly growing brain immediately became the single biggest energy hog in the body. I mean, it consumes something like 25% of our total energy, even though it's only about 2% of our body mass.
That enormous metabolic demand required the evolution of a highly prioritized energy allocation system. And this brings us to the selfish brain theory.
I find this theory so powerful because it just explains the ruthless, almost self-serving nature of our primary cognitive organ. How does the selfish brain make sure its own supply is paramount, even at the expense of other organs?
The brain is utterly ruthless in ensuring its survival. During recurring conditions of hunger, stress, and fasting, which was the constant reality of our ancestors, the brain evolved a mechanism to direct the limited energy metabolism entirely to its own advantage. It does this by inducing insulin resistance, IR, in peripheral insulin-dependent tissues, primarily the skeletal muscles.
So it essentially throws up a metabolic roadblock, preventing the muscle cells from taking glucose out of the bloodstream.
Exactly. By making the muscles resistant to insulin, the brain effectively starves them of glucose. This reduction in glucose uptake by the rest of the body conserves the limited blood glucose specifically for the brain and the immune system, both of which are insulin independent for glucose absorption.
Wow.
This mechanism was a genius adaptation. It ensured that even during prolonged fasting or resource stress, the core functions, cognition and defense, remained operational.
It's a remarkable survival hack, but it totally sets us up for disaster in the modern world where that same mechanism is triggered not by scarcity, but by chronic overconsumption of poor quality food.
This brings us to maybe the most powerful example of the modern mismatch, the link between micronutrient deficit and modern obesity, and is mediated by the satiety hormone leptin.
Leptin is the hormone produced by fat cells that signals I'm full, right? Yet, obese individuals often have high leptin levels, which indicates leptin resistance. What did the sources find about the role of micros in this whole picture?
The studies revealed a really strong association. Low blood levels of specific micronutrients, particularly vitamin C, E, and zinc, are associated with elevated and often ineffective leptin levels.
Okay, this is the crux of the hidden hunger slash obesity hypothesis. If I am full of calories, why would my body, which is releasing leptin, still push me to eat more just because I'm low on vitamin C?
It's a metabolic miscommunication. Think of the body as a car with a cracked gas tank. It keeps demanding more fuel, more calories, because it senses the engine components, the micronutrients, are failing.
I see.
The shortage of certain micronutrients, especially B vitamins and vitamin C, inhibits their role as essential cofactors for neurotransmitter synthesis, specifically for serotonin, which is crucial for regulating appetite and satiety.
So when the system can't synthesize the necessary neurotransmitters to regulate appetite because the cofactors are missing.
The body misinterprets the resulting metabolic inhibition as an urgent need for more fuel. The drive kicks in to maximize macronutrient quantity, which leads to overconsumption and obesity, in a desperate and often futile attempt to acquire the missing micronutrient quality.
That is a staggering insight into why chronic dieting so often fails. The quality deficit is what's driving the relentless pursuit of more quantity.
And we see this played out even with simple minerals. Take calcium. Low dietary calcium intake actually increases the calcium concentration inside your fat cells, the adipocytes, via hormonal signals. And this increase actively promotes fat storage, contributing directly to obesity.
So if you don't eat enough calcium, your body literally tells your fat cells to lock down and hold on to the fat.
Precisely. And conversely, increasing calcium intake reverses this mechanism. It leads to a decrease of calcium inside the fat cells. And this decrease promotes lipolysis fat oxidation, meaning the body actively burns fat. One meta-analysis found that improving calcium supply to around 800 milligrams a day could increase fat oxidation by a notable 11%.
Wow.
It just demonstrates how these single essential micronutrients act as metabolic regulators for energy storage, a function that's entirely separate from their caloric value.
So we've established that climate change forced complexity and then animal consumption solved the micronutrient crisis. Now we have to look at the internal engine that was capable of harnessing all that fuel and driving cognitive expansion, the hippocampus. The sources call it the evolutionary GPS and the adaptation motor, which I love.
The hippocampus is the absolute epicenter of our ability to cope with an unpredictable world. It's the critical link for spatial orientation, for memory recall, and for the complex processing of new sensory, emotional, and spatial impressions. For Homo erectus moving out of the forest and into these vast, dangerous, and changing savannas, this function was, well, it was essential.
It was required not just to find food, but to map the location of previous threats, to remember when different resource patches ripened, and to integrate all of that information into a cohesive survival strategy.
Right. It's the brain area that's responsible for contextualizing every new experience. And what makes the human hippocampus so central to adaptation is its unique capacity for adult hippocampal neurogenesis, AHN, the formation of new neurons well into adulthood.
That's a rare kind of plasticity. It means the brain isn't static. It can actively rebuild its most crucial mapping system in response to new environmental demands.
And that plasticity allows the brain to rapidly adapt to new challenges, new terrains, new information. It makes it the perfect engine for an exploratory, rapidly evolving species.
But the challenges our ancestors faced weren't solved by sitting still. They were solved by movement. The sources highlight that endurance running was a hallmark of Homo erectus.
Endurance running was a special characteristic that gave H. erectus a unique hunting advantage, the ability to persist until their prey just became exhausted. This physical requirement, combined with the cognitive need to navigate an enriched, varied, and dangerous environment, stimulates the formation of a critical chemical, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF.
The miracle grow for the brain, as we like to call it.
That's exactly what it is. BDNF is a molecule that promotes neurogenesis, stimulates plasticity, and helps neurons survive. We see the direct correlation today. Individuals with higher cardiorespiratory fitness consistently demonstrate larger hippocampal volume and better spatial memory.
So the selection for traits that enabled endurance activity would have simultaneously increased BDNF expression, driving neurogenesis and that rapid cognitive expansion.
So run to exhaustion wasn't just about securing dinner, it was chemically conditioning the brain to grow larger and smarter.
That makes sense.
And it provided a vital psychological buffer too. The constant hunger, the unpredictable nature of the hunt, the danger of the savannah, those are enormous sources of stress and anxiety. And those factors naturally reduce your exploratory drive and your cognitive function. Physical activity, like the chase, not only improves plasticity, but it actively reduces anxiety, promoting the necessary curiosity and resilience you need to explore new resource areas successfully. The mind and the body, they evolved in lockstep.
This crucial link between nutrition, physical challenge, and brain development is tragically exposed when we look at periods of extreme vulnerability, particularly the earliest stages of life.
Yes, we have to focus intensely on the 1,000-day window, which spans from conception to age 2. This is the period of the most rapid brain growth, which makes it incredibly sensitive to any deficit. Social neglect, a lack of necessary cognitive stimulation, and malnutrition during this window lead directly to reduced hippocampal volume.
So the brain is trying to build its complex wiring, but it just lacks the essential components.
It requires a constant, perfect supply. Micronutrients like iron, zinc, and vitamins A and D are absolutely essential for neurogenesis and myelination. That's the insulation process that makes nerve fibers fire rapidly and efficiently during this critical growth phase. Deficits suffered during pregnancy or early childhood can result in permanent physical and cognitive impairments and can set the stage for chronic diseases decades later.
And we see the ultimate demonstration of adaptation to nutrient scarcity in certain populations, like the pygmy phenotype. It really shows the extent of the evolutionary trade-off required for survival.
The short stature seen in pygmies, and historically in populations like Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, is widely hypothesized to be a genetic adaptation to permanently low energy and micronutrient intake within a resource-limited niche.
So their body's strategy was to maintain a stable, functioning brain, even if it meant sacrificing growth and size.
Exactly. It's a calculation to maximize survival and reproduction in chronic scarcity. By having a smaller overall body and brain size, the available nutrients are sufficient to support the necessary metabolic processes for a stable, albeit smaller, organism. They sacrificed growth speed and total size to maintain optimal nutrient efficiency for a stable brain-to-body ratio. It illustrates that evolution will prioritize survival and reproduction by any means necessary, even if it results in dramatically altered physical morphology.
We've tracked the evolution of the brain based on necessity, scarcity, and physical effort. Now, we have to jump straight into the modern mismatch. What happens when we remove the scarcity and replace it with hyperabundance and zero effort?
The survival mechanisms that built our intelligence, they turn against us. Our ancestral preference for sweetness and fat was the reward system pushing the selfish brain toward crucial energy resources. Today, high-fat and high-sugar reward foods are constantly available without any required effort. You just click a button.
It's the constant availability that creates the problem, isn't it?
It leads to continuous overstimulation of the reward pathway. This relentless bombardment of high dopamine signals causes the downregulation of dopamine receptors in the brain. It's a neurochemical burnout. And this can manifest as reward deficiency syndrome, or RDS, or often as chronic obesity, as the brain constantly seeks that diminishing high reward signal.
And the sources gave us a simple, everyday example of this reward system hijacking the brain's focus, the habit of skipping breakfast.
It confirms the brain's primal drive for maximum energy restoration and reward. If you skip breakfast, you inevitably satisfy the resulting strong hunger later with high-energy, high-fat reward foods. The brain, needing to restore equilibrium, prioritizes the immediate calorically dense satisfaction. The cake, the high-fat pastry, the processed snack over the complex whole-grain bread, or the lean protein that requires more metabolic effort to process. The selfish brain demands its reward, and it demands it now.
So if the brain evolved on this permanent, bioavailable supply of quality micronutrients, what happens when we compare that adapted diet to what most of us eat today?
Well, we can compare the adapted healthy diet, or AHD, which resembles our ancestors' mixed diet of roots, tubers, fruits, and quality animal products, with the typical Western diet, WD, which is high in processed foods, sugar, and saturated fats. The contrast is just stark.
The Western diet is inherently damaging, particularly to the brain because of inflammation.
That's the key mechanism. The WD induces a pervasive, chronic pro-inflammatory state throughout the body. And chronic neuroinflammation, inflammation within the brain, is now understood as a key contributor to cognitive decline and diseases like Alzheimer's.
And the adapted healthy diet acts as the antidote.
Precisely. The AHD is anti-inflammatory and shows these profound beneficial modulating effects on our metabolism and immune system. The fact that a diet so similar to the one we adapted to over millions of years shows these overwhelming positive effects today. It suggests that our genes simply haven't had time to adapt to the metabolic onslaught of hyper-processed Western food.
Given that so many of us suffer from hidden hunger today, can we just compensate with supplements? Just pop a multivitamin?
That's the million-dollar question, and the answer is, well, it's mixed. Multivitamin mineral preparations, MVMs, they certainly can compensate for the effects of low intake and hidden hunger in vulnerable groups, like older adults. However, they are not a substitute for a healthy diet.
Why not?
Because a healthy diet provides so much more than just the isolated vitamins and minerals. It provides complex fibers, phytochemicals, cofactors that all work synergistically. Extensive meta-analyses show that MVMs and single supplements, when used alone, have a limited and often contradictory track record for preventing cognitive decline or Alzheimer's. They can correct a deficit, but they cannot replace the full synergistic benefit of a nutrient-dense diet combined with physical and cognitive activity.
We move now to perhaps the most insidious threat to the modern mind, comfort itself. Our sources suggest that a lack of required challenge is actively shrinking the cognitive engine that evolution built.
It is monotonous environments, social isolation, and technological reliance. They all reduce cognitive stimulation, which is directly linked to decreased BDNF production and critically reduced hippocampal volume. This isn't theoretical. It was actually documented in scientists on long Antarctic expeditions where the environment was predictable and offered minimal new challenges. The brain literally conserves energy by reducing the size of its own adaptation engine.
And the ultimate outsourcing of our cognitive function is happening right now with AI chatbots. The sources introduce a term that I think we all need to understand: AI sicca.
AI chatbot-induced cognitive atrophy. AI sicca is the term used to describe the potential deterioration of our intrinsic thinking skills caused by excessive reliance on these powerful tools. When we use AI chatbots for complex tasks, thinking through problems, navigating spatial or factual data, making nuanced decisions, we are engaging in cognitive offloading.
We are shifting the essential work of synthesizing information from our own highly plastic neurons onto an external silicon processor.
And unlike just searching the internet, chatbots offer these highly personalized and interactive experiences, which can foster stronger, almost seamless cognitive dependence. By constantly offloading these tasks, the complex processes that stimulate neurogenesis and plasticity, we potentially inhibit the development of our own intrinsic memory, problem-solving, and critical thinking skills. We stop training the evolutionary GPS we needed for survival.
The authors really stress the imperative need for research here, especially among younger populations, to understand the long-term impact of this kind of cognitive substitution. We might be making ourselves collectively stupider because we've removed the necessary friction that drives brain growth.
We are effectively removing the very selection pressure that created the large, adaptable human brain in the first place.
We've traveled from the unforgiving savannas to the cushy, hyper-stimulating comfort of the modern world. And the synthesis is clear. The human brain's success story was not a simple accident, but the result of a precise, interdependent trio of factors.
Those three pillars are: first, a permanent bioavailable supply of high-quality micronutrients, the engine components, often derived from high-quality animal foods. Second, persistent physical activity, endurance, foraging, and hunting, which chemically conditioned the brain for growth via BDNF. And third, constant cognitive challenge in an enriched, unpredictable environment demanding spatial orientation and risk assessment.
These pillars, they form the blueprint for cognitive success. They're the same processes, the same triggers that allowed the human brain to grow in the first place. And they are, crucially, the same processes that we can actively engage in today to delay its aging process and mitigate the risks of the modern mismatch.
The key realization is that we evolved to thrive on variability and challenge. We design our modern lives, however, for maximum comfort, predictability, and efficiency, which often means maximum cognitive offloading.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry with you beyond this deep dive.
Our ancestors' survival depended entirely on the continued training of their internal biological GPS, their hippocampus, to navigate uncertainty, memorize resource locations, and manage constant danger. Every new path they took built capacity.
Think about the costs we are incurring through convenience, defined by AI Sika. We now outsource spatial memory, problem solving, and even foundational information synthesis to external digital tools.
Every time you choose outsourced navigation or you allow an algorithm to make a decision for you, you successfully arrive at your destination, sure. But you miss an opportunity to form a new episodic memory, to sharpen your spatial orientation, and to foster that crucial neurogenesis.
The non-digital world is the world of our ancestors. The ultimate modern challenge, according to these sources, is simple. Will you choose comfort and atrophy, relying on outsourced navigation and thought, or will you embrace the unknown and actively train your brain to be the successful, intelligent hunter-gatherer it was engineered to be? It is up to you to sensitize and train your memory and biological GPS. Remember, challenge creates capacity. Go get lost.